And we're live.
Woo! Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the Footnotes podcast, where we discuss footnotes of the week, important events, ideas that we came across. I'm Paul.
I'm Jude.
We're gonna probably make this intro obsolete at some point, but
Yeah.
with it because it's super awkward.
Yeah.
Might as well just do this naturally. So what's been going on with you, June?
I mean, there hasn't been too much news this week.
Mm-hmm.
I came to Toronto and find that when I come to Toronto, I don't like my life as much. I don't like my house.
Why is that?
Like, I've thought about that. One thing is when I'm in my Hamilton house or in Hamilton in general, like I go to the gym regularly. In my new Hamilton house, there's a gym literally downstairs. I can just go and walk in and turn on the TV and that the whole thing's fine. But I feel like that contributes to it. Maybe my room, I associate it with my high school days.
Mm-hmm. Does that bring you a lot of pain?
I guess so. Like when I imagine high school June in my room, it's angsty little June writing. I wrote probably like hundreds of thousands of words into like a Word doc. It's a very angsty Word doc. Whenever I had like mood swings or I was feeling like anxious or when I had something I like needed to say, I could just go there and like type it out, reflect profusely.
Right.
So like that's what I associate with my.
Was it effective at all?
I think so. I think that's why I did it. I think that's why I kept coming back to it. I like when I'm just like in a trance and like writing and you get the tactile feedback from the keyboard like.
Yeah, I'm quite familiar with your tactile feedback.
Yeah. There's a rhythm to that be enjoyable.
I remember doing similar things, but I could never write what I thought because I was so worried about grammar and things like that, and I could never get into like a flow. So what I always did was I just locked myself in my room and pontificate. Is that the word? Just like lecture to myself about my problems and like I'm my own advisor as I work through them. I still do that. It's just I don't see that.
I think you told me about that technique.
Right.
Your own advisor.
Meeting with John, I think was what I called it.
The advisor character.
Yes.
Well, I could see that being effective. You're trying to think through something, and you're having a fully fleshed out conversation with yourself.
Right.
Instead of, because I find that like when you're just like sitting on something in your mind, like, they're not fully articulated. It's just jumbles of like maybe like 4 words and then something else, and then maybe that repeats like 20 times before you're like, what am I thinking about?
Right. It's not directed in any way. It's just
it's not the most effective or productive, or maybe it's different in different people's minds. So
maybe
like some of my friends just tell me like, oh, when I'm sitting down, I just think about nothing and my mind goes blank. Like, oh, really? What mind do you have?
Sounds like a luxury.
Yeah. I mean, that does relate to something. I can relate to you more about, I guess, week 3 of June's lessons from the divided brain.
Okay, go ahead.
So I talked last week about how the left and right brain have very, I guess, different personalities. Left brain, one of the differences being the left brain is very certain, almost egotistical, arrogant, and the right brain is, on the other hand, the opposite of that, not certain about anything, willing to embrace the chaos, things like that. And it also turns out that there's a big difference in outlook in terms of mood. Okay. So the right brain is actually like a huge sad boy. So there's a lot of studies with lesions and neuroimaging that confirm that. So for lesion studies, if you have a left hemisphere lesion, you have greater likelihood to have depression. And when you have a right hemisphere lesion, you're more likely to be manic, or the quote they used was unduly cheerful. So that sort of seems to be the stance of the self-affirming, cheerful, optimistic stance of the left hemisphere. And the right hemisphere seems to be capable of being entrenched in emotions and chaos, and uncertainty and the unknown. Yeah, if you like neuroimaging, EEG, to see relative brain activity, greater right hemisphere than left hemisphere activity is predictive of depression. And you can also stimulate the brain in different ways, or shut off function in brain to relative degrees that basically show the same effect. So the right hemisphere is a sad boy.
That's strange. I don't know. It feels strange to hear that, because I don't know. For me, I wouldn't think that there would be a localization, or there would be greater emphasis in one mood in one half of the brain as opposed to the other, because isn't the mood regulators of the brain on both hemispheres? Like the amygdala is found as a part of both hemispheres, right? So is it that there's information that's being transmitted between the amygdala, for example, to the outer cortex, and that the difference is that there's different information in the right brain and the left brain that's communicating with the same emotional processor? Is that what's going on, or do you have some idea?
I mean, so if I could try to understand that argument, it'd be something like the root of emotional flux, like emotional, let's say, tone or outlook, is based essentially in the amygdala and our, I don't know, more base emotional systems, the lower level brain systems.
Right.
Yes, but I'm not exactly sure how they interact with the cortex and our experience of different moods. But there seems to be a pretty consistent mapping of well, which parts of the brain are necessary for certain moods, or which part of the outer cortex. So not only is there a hemispheric difference, but there's also like a what's it called? Caudal and this ventral.
Caudal is this way. I think this dorsal and ventral this way.
Yeah. There's also that difference that I'll just call it a front and back difference.
Yeah.
So in your right hemisphere, the way I drew it out on my book is I put a frowny face on the front part of the right hemisphere, and a slightly smiling face on the back half of the right hemisphere. So it turns out the further the lesion is to the back of the right hemisphere, the more likely you are to be depressed.
Right.
So, makes sense. So it seems to me that, I mean, there is a definite role that the cortices play play in regulating mood.
Mm-hmm.
Like most of the neurons in our cortex supposedly are inhibitory.
Mm-hmm.
So there might be like a flip thing going on.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I thought that was a interesting observation about the differences between the cortices.
Well, conceptually, it ties in with some of what we've been talking about in terms of the selective attention of the right brain and the left brain, where the right brain focuses on integrating newfound information, and the left brain focuses on ordering what's already known. Mm-hmm. This is sort of like speculation, but if you were to focus on just what you knew, you would have to worry a lot less. So if you just had your left brain, as you said, less depressive symptoms or manic symptoms, in fact, and possibly because you have such certainty of the world, that you have such security that you're able to manifest in this way. And then if you just have your right brain, then you're constantly dealing with chaos, constantly trying to integrate new information. And I can imagine how that would lead to depressive symptoms, because it'd be super overwhelming and you would never be sure of yourself. You'd never be confident. Those are loose associations, but I can definitely see how conceptually that would map.
Yeah, and another thing that was interesting was the right hemisphere take on the world. If the left is a lot more certain and bombastic, let's say, the right hemisphere is a lot more hesitant and reserved.
Mm-hmm.
It really reserves judgment and does not like to jump to conclusions, which reminded me a lot about me in the sense that, so in high school, I was a opinion editor for my high school newspaper.
Okay.
And so you'd expect an opinion writer to be opinionated.
Right.
But I found that like I could never find myself to be opinionated on any of the topics. Like, I think a common topic that was written about in the school paper was provincial politics, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And like all of those topics seemed, well, it seemed to me the other people who were writing about it were arrogant, because how could you possibly understand so much? Or there's so much. What I thought was there's so much beyond you that you don't understand.
Right.
How can you write and talk about these, and how can you form a I don't know, such a strong opinion about these topics? Mm-hmm. So as the opinion writer, I never really wrote a lot of opinion pieces. I was good at editing and seeing the flaws in other people's writing, but I never took much of a stance myself. Mm-hmm. And that's still me to this day. I have some things that I'm more certain of, but I am generally tentative to come to any judgment. Yeah, so I thought that was a interesting observation, and like it might be because I'm reading the book that I'm seeing every single thing through the right-left lens.
Right.
It's very possible. It's like the medical student syndrome, when you think you have every single disease you're learning about. But I really do think a lot of temperamental differences, a lot of the mood differences, can be attributed to, let's say, hemispheric dominance, or which parts of which hemisphere are more inhibiting the other, or something like that. So I'll continue to dig in.
Well, that's an interesting point too. I want to go back to having opinions. I was very similar to you, except that I think I have just more blind arrogance. Or when I decide on believing something, I really, really believe it. and I'm willing to fight people for it. And that's probably a temperament thing. But I was in debate team when I was in high school, and I know you also participated in that as well. And I was just terrible at it because everything we talked about, I just knew so little, and I couldn't believe what I was saying. So at the slightest question that the opponents would give me, I just step back and be like, "Oh no, you're probably right," but like I'd be very weak on my stance. So yeah, I just found that super interesting. And one thing I'm trying to do is trying to decide for myself, what are things that I can really believe? What are things that I can really support, so that I know where I stand, and that I wouldn't be in those situations where I wouldn't have an opinion. For some reason, I think it's more and more important for people as they grow up to have opinions. And although when I was young, I looked down at my parents for having such strong opinions, now I'm getting to the point where I'm like, okay, well, I think it's unsustainable not to have opinions. I think it's difficult to address the issues of life, or just to confront the chaos and the uncertainty of the real world without having some sort of opinion, some sort of stance to guide you through it. And of course, it should be open to change, but I think it's very important to have a specific stance. So that's something I've been grappling with these past few weeks as well. And of course, like, this podcast has helped. But yeah, I wanted to get your take on that as well, like the importance of arguments and the importance of having a stance, and where you are in your journey. That's a lot. I'm sorry.
No. I just wanted to hear to bounce it back to you. I just wanted to hear like an example of a opinion that you think is important to have and that you do hold.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Man, the one that I've been struggling the most recently is the debate around gender identity.
Wow.
And the reason, okay, yeah, this is opening up a can of worms. But the reason why I have issues is because I think there's a conflict between values that I have. And one value is compassion and the willingness to help others and to see them flourish. And the other one is, I guess, I don't know if it's a value. I think it's more a hesitation towards giving people what they want in general. Because a lot of people ask for a lot of things. And so I've been trying to work through that. I still haven't come to a great conclusion as to what I feel strongly about. I think it's good to support people who are trying to find themselves, but I think there should be some caution taken when we try to detail out exactly what would help them in the future. But beside that point, I think that's one of the things that's been on my mind. So if that's one example, I can think of others if you're keen on hearing more. But
I mean, no, I think that's a good example to work from. And like what I really agree with you there on is like the idea, like I agree that there's suffering that comes from, being, let's say, a marginal gender identity, or being in flux about the state of your identity, whether it's your gender or any other dimension of your being. And for sure there is discrimination around that, and a lot of biases that can cause undue suffering. So like I've always said, for the most part, I agree with the problems. What I don't agree with is the supposed solution to that. Because, my stance, as has been the more tentative, apprehensive stance, this position that I've always had, my stance is that there are very many ways for things to go wrong, and only very, very few ways for things to go right. Even with the most well-intentioned initiative, things don't go as planned. And that's a big lesson from complexity theory as well. So in complex systems, the outcomes are nonlinear. Nonlinear meaning you can not exactly predict that the path that your action will take, and what consequences it'll have, like a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now. So even the smallest things can have the biggest impact. The biggest investments might have a trivial impact in the future. So when it comes to gender identity, like that's not a topic I'm not familiar with. I think I would benefit from trying to better understand the problem. Like, I do think I am an empathetic person, so there probably are very tough problems to contend with. But let's not jump the gun in terms of what is truly beneficial and what's benefiting who.
Right. And see, the thing with that is there are people who are spending lots and lots of time researching this and understanding more. And of course, there's people on both sides of the argument who are activists. Let's say like free speech activists versus transgender rights activists, and they spend a lot of time working through this, and it hasn't been a one-sided issue. It's interesting though that I think the community around us, we know that McMaster, for example, painted this walkway or sidewalk or a crosswalk in the colors of pride, right? The rainbow, very recently, and it gained a lot of approval. So definitely the forces and the great organizations and people around us seem to be rallying behind pride and of validation of.
I think looking at the comment section of the Mac Facebook post about that to paint a different story.
Oh, really? I didn't actually look at the comments.
Yeah, no, I mean there is a significant amount of pushback, but also a significant amount of support.
Right. So it's a very complicated issue, and like you've been saying, and I've been saying as well, is we don't know what's actually beneficial to people who demand more of these rights, and who say that these rights are going to be beneficial in the long run. And it's so hard to say that because it's very easy for us to be pigeonholed into people who are like of the patriarchy or who are looking down on them, condescending, because we're not the ones suffering and we're not the ones going through these issues such as gender identity or gender dysphoria. So I have a little bit of a problem with that as well. So what I just tend to do is just to err on the side of caution of what I say, and just to say, to the extent of what I know, which is not a very fun argument, which is not a very entertaining or interesting argument, but it's one I think a lot of people are taking, which might be an issue as well, because people aren't educating themselves or learning more about it to actually grapple with them.
I mean, there was one thing that you mentioned that, that reminded me of something. So, like, I think one of the big arguments that I hear from like my more liberal leaning friends is about the primacy of the lived experience and the value that has. So you were talking about earlier how you may be pigeonholed as a, representative of the patriarch because you don't have the same lived experience. for example, of being a trans person. And so, the extreme of the argument is something like, because you don't have access to that unique lived experience, your input can be disregarded.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the extreme of that. And, to a degree, that's true. So, in earlier episodes, we've talked about the value that our senses can bring, and our embodied knowledge, our subjective experience, qualitative inquiry, that can be extremely powerful, but it is also subject to internal bias, and really the millions of ways that our let's say calibration system of our self-knowledge, and our biases and our motivations, a million ways that can be corrupted and go wrong. So I do think that that can be a problematic argument to make, but at least the extreme form of that the lived experience is the only and the highest valued source of data or source of information, and that lived experiences, which are, let's say, not as to a greater extent in terms of suffering and in terms of the problems that you have, then they have a right to be disregarded or devalued. So right. if you have a certain amount of privilege, because of your race, because of your upbringing, then it may sound as though your opinion is, you can easily make the case, if you're in that frame of mind, saying that, yeah, of course that's not as valuable a data source because it hasn't experienced all that. But that is it's a very dangerous oversimplification to make, I think, because there are so many ways that internal data system can be corrupted and be motivated towards causes that you might not even be aware of. And secondly, because even if it's the case that the qualities of experiences that people have aren't to the same magnitude or the same severity as those of others, but I don't think that diminishes the, let's say, value of someone's experiences. And so that's all I'll say about that. But
do you mind if I jump in? I just wanted to say I've been thinking about that as well, and what I did was I tried to make an analogy between people who experience these issues with people who have, let's say, depression. So we know that depression can really distort your sense of reality, and it can change how you perceive things, and the sorts of thoughts that people have when they have depression are not always very good for them, and they lead to behaviors that are not very good for them, objectively speaking, in terms of, let's say, their physical health, right? Depressed individuals may go and engage in self-harm, or may just isolate themselves for long periods of time, which is, of course, not very good for them. But the backlash, I think, about making the case, or sort of, I guess, you're not devaluing the lived experience, I know that, but the way that the argument comes off is that you're saying, okay, well, your lived experience is just as valid as research or other forms of knowledge, right? And to some people, that's equivalent to devaluing their experience and invalidating their experience. The problem with that is it's localizing the problem in the individual, and that is very painful to people, right? It's saying you're the issue because you have a distorted sense of thought, and your ideas are not valid because you have some sort of distortion, or you have some cognitive biases. You're the issue. You're the problem. And that's why the argument that I guess you were making, as well as I was thinking about, is often made with caution, because that's the whole invalidating my lived experience argument, right? You're saying that I don't know what's good for me. I know what's good for me. And so there's that backlash. So that's the point I wanted to make was, what do you think about that?
I'm not sure if I fully understood it.
Mm-hmm. I haven't portrayed it very well, but
so can you give me a TLDR again?
Yeah, sure. So you said that we should be holding the evidence gained from lived experience as highly as we would from other forms of evidence.
It has the potential to be held.
It has the potential. Sorry. So, right. What I'm saying is that has the opportunity, or that has the connotation that you're invalidating lived experiences, that they become, or this is how it's perceived. Your argument is fine, but this is how it's perceived. That their lived experiences are not clear indicators of the problem. And that's a problem for them, for people who undergo these things, who undergo lived experiences. Because what you're essentially telling them is, okay, what you're feeling is not the best indicator of your problem. What you're feeling is not necessarily the best indication of your problem. But to them, it is the best indication, because it's what's causing the stress. It's what's causing pain. Does that make more sense? So there's a lot of backlash, is what I'm saying, because you're telling them you're wrong. You're telling them they're wrong.
Right. So the argument back and forth might go like, hey, I have this really powerful lived experience that needs to be listened to and advocated for, and someone says, hey, wait a minute, your felt sense of like emotions and suffering might not be the best indicator of like the broader problem that we have. And then you start that endless argument of, well, are you invalidating the immediacy of my experience and my I guess, well, desire to be heard, desire for my like suffering to be understood, and so I do understand like that it is a contentious stance that often leads to non-productive back and forth like that. Like in terms of trying to suggest solutions, I mean, like one thing I have been thinking about is that people react like very violently towards when they're in pain, or when, I mean, let's say you have a gaping wound on your arm, and I try to grab it. Of course you're gonna you're gonna drive me away and get super angry at me.
I'm gonna slap you. Yeah,
you're gonna slap me. And perhaps the problem is we have wounds of that severity that aren't as visible, that aren't as definable, whose duration of pain is maybe unpredictable and comes in waves, and so there's this whole layer of complexity behind, let's say, some of the suffering and lived experiences that maybe a lot of our peers, for example, in the modern age are experiencing. And one critique I always had about the, let's say in general, the political right, or the more conservative leaning folks, let's say, is that they don't seem to really understand where that is coming from, and how to address it in the most sensitive way. Because if you did have like a gaping arm wound, let's say, probably as a clinician, someone would hopefully take care of it with a degree of sensitiveness, but also firmness, but with displaying some kind of empathy and remorse. But that could also be construed as being problematic because you don't want to reduce, let's say, the left's position as being, oh, those poor people, they are in such pain and suffering, So that, I don't mean to portray it like that, but I think what I'm trying to get at is when people usually have very emotional, very defensive reactions to something, I think a big part of that cause is some sort of pain or some sort of suffering.
Right. And I think it's great that we're pursuing medicine because, like, you don't have to be far right, or you don't have to be on the right or the left necessarily to be a clinician. I think there's a lot of leeway, and the benefit of that is, I think, you can still be sensitive and kind while being firm. So, for example, with the argument that you made, I think it's worthwhile to ask how that gash came to be, and maybe they were being reckless, or maybe they made a stupid decision. So I think it's important to call that out while still being sensitive and caring and treating the wound, right? And luckily, in a medical system, hopefully different physicians will have different stances, and so we can cover the bases together as a collective unit. But I think as long as we support human flourishing in some way or another, things will be okay. Hopefully. It's complex.
Yeah, like it's very complex, and I hate, like, let's say, I've never been very political of a person. Like,
right.
I've never really cared much for politics. And in high school, I mostly thought, even as the opinion editor, that politics was very superficial. I was very cynical about the whole process and the impact that it had in people's day-to-day lives. And I was very skeptical of the motivations of people who pursue politics. And combine that with the fact that I don't like making quick judgments or on which political party is better or which political stance is the better one to hold. More and more, I'm developing more a sense into how policies affect people and which may be, from my point of view, better in some sense. But I still don't like engaging in politics. I don't think that's, not everything has to be about politics. Not everything is. And I really don't think that it's the most important level at which problems are addressed.
I would have to agree with you on that. Very similar. I think the only thing that's attractive to politics is maybe gossip is fun.
Political gossip?
And it's fun. Political gossip is fun. I think this discourse is fun because it's interesting to see what sort of stances people take and what stances people are willing to defend for their political game. It's a game in itself, I think, and I see it that way.
But I see it as more of a combative game, and it really doesn't need to be a boxing match. There doesn't seem to be any sort of sense of consensus or discourse, or only discord.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll get swept up in political activism at some point in our future.
I think we would have to make extra steps to ensure we don't get involved, because I'm sure we will.
Yeah.
I'm sure we.
Mm-hmm. There will be many opportunities to.
Well, June, then I want to transition a bit, because you mentioned you're not a big fan of politics, but you like discourse, right? You're those
Yep.
you would categorize those as moments of deep flow or entrancement, or situations where you're really, when you feel like the time is passing without you noticing. I know you've been grappling with that this week, and I have been too, but do you have any updates you wanted to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. What a smooth transition, Paul. Excellent. No, but so yesterday I was at a Starbucks and what was I doing? I was getting my my modules completed that you have to complete before starting med school. I completed them, and then I started. Yeah, I noticed that I was entering a state of heightened attention, awareness, and flow, and so I was. And another thing to add is that yesterday I was calling with like the financial person at RBC to set up another line of credit, and so I could get the free iPad and the intro points. And for some reason after that, like I felt very powerful. I have it, at least for the next couple of years. I have so much financial, let's say, flexibility or stability, at least for a little while. And I felt powerful as a result of that, and as a result of being on a rapid succession of completing my tasks. So I started to feel very ambitious about my own abilities and like what I could become, or like what I had the potential to be. Um, so this took probably around 30 minutes. I was at Mel Lastman Square around, it's in North York. That's where the truck driver mowed over a bunch of people in Toronto. The same location, but that's where I go often. So I was just pacing around the square, pacing around like that part of town. I was just like, just going off, like thinking about how I feel as though there is we're at the verge of a radical transformation in our world, and in terms of our technology, in terms of our consciousness and our mental models of the world, and how fortunate I am to have some grasp of like kind of new way of seeing things and complexity science, how like my interest in like psychedelics may prime me to be in a position where, for example, if I become a psychiatrist in the future, that may be like a very, let's say, interesting, very powerful tool in terms of combating mental disorders, but deeper, let's say, spiritual problems. And how I wanted to look into AI and blockchain and the emerging technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, as they call it. And so I had a bunch of combine that with my sense of like being super powerful and full of potential, and being being, I don't know, drunk in my self admiration, let's say. That I felt for the first time in a long while very ambitious. I felt as though that You know, there's a huge wave coming, and if you're prepared, I could ride on that wave. If that I'm at the optimal place to let that flow find me, if that makes sense.
Right.
Um, but, but it's something I hadn't experienced in a long time, especially ambition, because I do think one corner of me is very deeply ambitious and deeply confident, and you know, that really believes in my own potential and the opportunity, the chance that I have in this life, but it's not expressed very often. So I think that was a rare moment for me, but it's something that I want to experience more of.
Right. That's the question I wanted to ask you, because I also have those moments where I feel like I'm on top of the world.
Yeah.
And it's usually spurred by, I'd call it dumb stuff like that, because like it's so minute, right? Like you open up a new line of credit and all of a sudden you're God.
Yeah, I'm like,
You're able to
yeah.
on any. So I call it dumb moments like that, but I get those feelings too, and I always want more, but I always get to a point again where I like settle down and like,
yeah.
you know, so I'm curious, like, what has your experience been, and how are you gonna get more of that? You're gonna open a line of credit every week, or?
Yeah, clearly not a sustainable option, but you know, it's like it's a brief peek into what those states of intense concentration and intense flow and engagement can do for you, and where that might lead you. You know, when I talk about there's an incoming like huge tsunami, let's say, you know, I sense that there are shiftings and rumblings and the undercurrents of our culture and our societies, and there are very rapid transformations that can occur as a result of new technologies, new drugs, and things like that. But that if you're not well positioned to ride that wave, you can drown in it, or be left behind, or be demolished. And like I said before, what riding the wave means is being optimally, let's say, balanced and engaged. The best way to prepare for that wave is by, well, practicing being intensely engaged, and in that flow zone, and being able to sustain that for long periods of time, so that you can you can surf any wave.
Right.
You know, I've had this thought about like the inner workings of the psyche too. So I've explained to you before, like the kind of waterfall model of
Yes.
the consciousness, how we occupy like let's say a tiny little island on the top of it, but you know there's a big sea outside, and at some point it just drops off into the infinite depths of, well, you know, who knows what's there. And let's call it the transcendent, let's say.
Okay.
And when we're in a deep state of engagement and flow, you know, you're able to surf, you know, from your island, you know, some of the waves coming from the big deep sea of consciousness. But maybe if you get really good at it, maybe if you're in like a peak kind of state, you can also surf that infinite waterfall, let's say. That's something akin to the transcendent experience. So that's what I've thought about, and I think that's what these intense, let's say, you said you felt like a god when you experienced these deep states of flow. And I think the reason behind that, the reason why we use that kind of language, is that there is something divine about that process, that is, inconceivable in day-to-day life, but in different aspects of life, you get brief glimpses of what that might be like. Yeah, that's my.
If I could, I want to add, because I've been also struggling with trying to find that state, right? The transcendent state. And some common advice that I hear is, do what's meaningful and do what what puts you in that state of flow. And the problem that I've always faced is I know when I'm in that state, but I don't know what it is about that state that makes me feel that way. I can't define what it is. But as you were talking, I came up with an idea. And that idea is, oftentimes when I feel like I'm like a god, when I feel like I'm in enough control, but I still need to grapple with some challenges to get through, it's as though I've connected the present to an attainable goal, a future. And I aren't precisely sure what steps need to be taken, because if I did, that'd be kind of boring. I have an idea of what I need to do to get to that future state. And I know, I'm confident enough to do it, to pursue it. And that chase, it's the thrill of the chase. It's the thrill of the hunt to that point that is so meaningful and that puts me in a state of flow. So, for example, this line of credit.
Yeah.
You took a knowledgeable and certain step towards attaining a goal, and that goal is getting an iPad or getting rewards and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And so when you took that goal, that measurable goal, you could see in the future that, okay, I took the first step into getting what I want.
Yeah.
So you feel powerful. You feel like you can do anything because you were able to do this.
Right.
So I think there's a connection between where you are and where you want to be.
Yeah.
And a conceptualization of how you're going to get there that gives you that sense of meaning, that gives you that sense of flow.
Right. Yeah. Let's go off of that line of credit example. So, that's one very small, let's say, a subset of your goals, let's say, a subset of your motivation system. So that when you take a step that you appraise as positive towards that goal, you get a small dopamine rush, and you feel powerful, you feel accomplished in some way. Now, try taking that to more meaningful extremes. So let's say you have a more sophisticated vision or goal of where you want to get to. So let's say in the next year I'm going to open up a clinic, and and for my reception we need an iPad. So I open up my line of credit, which is great because I'll have the financial ability to build my clinic. That's great. On top of that, I get a free iPad. So it's as though there are two, let's say, motivations or sub goals that are stacking on top of each other and aligning with each other. So perhaps you get even a greater dopamine rush, or rushes in different parts of your brain, let's say. Okay, so if you take that to the furthest level, say that at some moment in time, for whatever reason, you get this you get a revelation. You know, it's like this idyllic paradisal vision of where your life or the life of people in the world could be. And let's say you did something that such that like all your motivation systems have essentially aligned. And when you take that step towards that vision, then like all the disparate parts of you feel are being rewarded. So like maybe your body and and its own motivations and desires, like for food, for mating, for like exercise and activity, your intellectual goals, your like more spiritual goals and emotional needs, like all of those are we're stacking together when you look at that idyllic place. So and that deep sense of meaning is an indication that all your motivation systems are being aligned. Like that is the most certain you can get that's the most certain you can get that you should pursue this goal. And that all your motivations and needs will be satisfied optimally. And maybe even benefit each other and synergize well.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the ideal state. Those are ideal actions you want to take. It's ones that fulfill, ones that give you many different kinds of boners in different ways.
Yeah.
That's my.
Yeah, I mean, well, the boner example is interesting because like sexual arousal is a process of rapid positive feedback. Like, you know, I don't know why I thought of this example, but I always thought it'd be funny if you're like, you know, let's say you start making out with a beautiful girl, and in 5 seconds you could be like, "Oh, that was a great experience. You know, I'm so grateful to have met you today. I'll see you tomorrow." It's like, you know, any like guy on the planet that would be able to do that? Any heterosexual, you know? No, because it's driven by this like positive feedback loop that is immensely powerful. So yeah, like one of the features of the left hemisphere is that it has a lot of within network connections, whereas the right hemisphere has a lot of between network or between region connections. So the left hemisphere, you know, structurally is much more self-reinforcing and dependent on processes of positive feedback, and that's, you know, a process that gives it a certainty but also rigidity, right? But imagine that, you know, that incredibly powerful positive feedback loop can be applied to a vision or a goal which makes sense to pursue in that way. You know, it's like it's a rush, you know, that meaningful state. It seems to come out of nowhere sometimes, and I do think it is generated by those powerful positive feedback loops. The like, yeah, synergies between your motivations and how you feel at the moment, and you know how you are fed and how you have slept, and you know all those parts of your mood.
Right.
So it's a very powerful force.
This also ties in with another footnote that I had this week.
Yeah.
So this week was the last week of my musical course, and it was our final performance. And surprisingly enough, like it went all right. I think it went okay. But after my performance and after the applause, and I sat down in the green room, and I just sat there and I thought to myself, I don't enjoy this anymore. Like I don't like this anymore. And I had to really ask myself why I was feeling that way, and maybe it has to do with sort of what you've been saying in terms of the different types of motivation and feedback. Um, for one, I felt like I didn't get the applause that I wanted, which is like very like egotistical and things like that. But sincerely, honestly, I felt like the amount of effort that I put in didn't end up translating to the amount of reward that I intentionally wanted. And then I thought to myself, oh, I can't say that to people. I got to figure out another reason why I'm not interested in acting anymore. And I've also realized that I'm not. It doesn't feel intrinsically enjoyable anymore. So it's not play. It's no longer about play. Now it's about almost about impressing others or about. It's become work. Let's say it's no longer about having fun for the sake of having fun. That sucks because that's how a hobby turns into, well, work and also not a hobby anymore. That's no fun. So that's something I've been struggling with, and now I'm wondering whether or not I want to do this when I go to Western in med. I think I'll do it just for the community, but I'm not sure if I'll enjoy the acting portion or the singing portion as much.
Yeah.
But
one thing that strikes me about what you said is like the whole applause thing. You might not think that to be like very important, but I think you have to remember that you come from like an extremely supportive background, right?
Right.
Health Sciences musical, you can get very great applause and very good feedback in terms of that. So I could see, that there being a drop off from the McMaster world to the world.
Right.
So I think it's definitely reasonable to feel disappointed. I felt disappointed going from third year to fourth year, or between performances in fourth year. Like, man, you could applaud more. Come on.
Right.
One thing I would say is that we don't have it so bad in Canada. Korean crowds are like super rough.
Have you experienced one?
Yeah, it's just so strange after busking performances or in general the crowd is just silent. No one wants to be the one that is applauding more loudly or more enthusiastically than others. So there's the cultural difference, but this is all to say that you feeling that the social reward hasn't been what you were expecting. Like I think that's very reasonable. Like, and you've also been doing this for a long time. Yes, the
building
music,
up an ego.
Yeah, well, there's that aspect too, but the music example, I guess it maps on directly that I talked to you about last week from the Divided Brain book. Music, when we first encounter it as non-professionals or as non-musicians, and when you sing along to it, when you listen to it, that requires right hemisphere activation. But in musicians, it seems to be in professional musicians, it seems to be the left hemisphere that's handling most of the, let's say, musical tasks. So, maybe there has been that shift from you from, a creative expression and play to, routinized work. You know exactly what to expect, from that theater environment. And, funnily enough, it hasn't been met. So I have the same sentiments about like continuing musical too. I feel as though I won't get the same kind of same kind of enjoyment and fun out of it anymore. Although I'm sure I will, but because there's an element of predictability about it now. Like I was talking to Gian a few days ago about it too. Yeah, Gian and Angus and I had lunch in downtown Toronto, and he was saying the same thing. Like, I'm grateful that I had the experience, but it's getting old now. Like I know what to expect. So I do understand you, and I do think it would benefit the both of us to pursue artistic endeavors that aren't as predictable and known.
Very good point. And I want to talk about HSM just really briefly. I think I feel like I had the ideal HSM experience.
Uh-huh.
Because I started from the bottom and then I worked my way up.
Yeah.
And that's probably like the best experience you could ever have, because each year it just gets better and better.
Yeah,
and then now I'm here in the summer complaining about a lack of applause. But yeah, so I started as chorus and then main cast and then producer. That's quite the fun shape. It's
you
very
did
fun.
Director. You have to do 1 year more.
Go back just to direct.
Yeah, go back. Kick Judy out.
No, I'm not. I'm good. I think producing was pretty much the same as directing, in my estimation. But I also wanted to talk to you about why people act in general, and I'll keep it brief. But the idea that I had was that, well, okay, let me give a little bit of background. So of course I enjoyed acting for a while, but what I also do a lot of the times is I act out situations that would never happen. And you know, people talk about this too. You know, like you have an argument with someone, and you didn't get to say the thing that night in the shower or in your bed. You're like having that argument, and you have that perfect argument, and you work out the exact rebuttals that you want, and you win. It's kind of strange to me that people do that, and maybe it's because that conceptualization of the ideal is
Paul, I'm gonna
fun to people.
Interrupt you.
You know, imagining. Sorry.
I'm gonna have to interrupt you because I have to pee really bad.
Oh my god. Okay.
Quick pee break.
That's a strange time to go to the washroom. I've also been drinking all this water, and I have not had to pee in the last 4 hours. So that tells you who has the better bladder, who has the stronger bladder, and who will be able to propagate their genes in the future a lot better. The weak should fear the strong. I stumbled there. The weak should fear the strong. So this podcast was started by June and I because we wanted to keep in touch. And it also, like, we don't have a lot of friends where we can just talk about these weird ideas with. And I call them weird because I think it's very niche. They're very niche topics that a number of people are interested in. And so, you know, June's back here, so he's gonna talk about what his thoughts are on the matter. But so go ahead, June.
Can you repeat to me from your halfway point about why acting is? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Why is acting enjoyable? That's sort of the question, and I think a part of that is that you get to act out the ideal, and that's fun because, you know, if you imagine the ideal, it's meaningful in a way, right? Because it's divine, whatever. It's fun to do. I also wondered whether or not. Actually, no. I'll keep this for later. This is not really related to acting, but this is something else. So yeah, why do you think acting is pleasurable, and why do people cause so much drama too?
Acting in terms of like acting out someone they aren't, like a completely different character, or in what sense? I missed your example of that person of being really excited, forming arguments in their head.
Right. So I just mean, I guess acting can take on several definitions, but acting in the sense, yeah, like taking on a persona that isn't the person.
That is in the person, right?
That isn't. So it's like taking on a character, pretending to be something.
Right.
Why is that fun? Why is it fun to pretend not to be something else?
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is that, you know, children love pretend play and like act all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, the things I've heard about Piaget from Jordan Peterson or like from the psych courses is that children learn to, acting is an embodied form of learning, and like you are trying to represent the patterns of behavior that are manifest within a certain the thing that's being acted out. So
Mm-hmm.
if your kids are playing the parent game, if some young kids are playing the parent game and one's playing mom and one's playing dad and one's playing the baby. I've often played the baby in my kindergarten days with another pretty classmate of mine playing mom. Anyways,
Nice.
but yeah, fun memory from a 7-year-old, 4-year-old June. But yeah, I think I'm just trying to think back on what that was like. Do you remember? Do you remember acting like when you were a kid, acting to
Like
be
a baby?
like, or didn't you play? Haven't you played different games where you have to act out different?
It's interesting. I've never, when I was young.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't my thing, I guess. I didn't have action figures or anything.
Really?
Yeah.
Or okay,
I
well,
guess sports is kind of, I don't know. Can you say that team sports are a form of role play?
team sports are a form of role play. What do you mean?
Okay, so I mean, I've never played pretend, right?
Yeah. I'm
But I
sure,
have played.
but none that are like very memorable.
Okay, yeah, I don't remember
Yeah.
ever doing it. Yeah, but I remember in sports, like play soccer, you could be different roles.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if that's what you were getting at, or if you were just getting at specific social games.
Yeah, I mean, like soccer is, a social game too. And there's whether it's in soccer or like the parental unit, there are different roles and different patterns of embodied behavior that you need
Right.
to take on. And so children seem to do that by engaging in pretend play and acting. They're very sophisticated and intricate patterns of behavior that they're learning to map on or trying to better understand or conceptualize. Um, but like how that applies to people now. I mean, like, I guess it would depend on the type of acting you're doing. So, like, when you dress particularly well, and you're trying to be a little more of yourself than,
Mm-hmm.
than you are, there's that line, like, dress for success, or, Jordan Peterson in a, like, a interview lately, in a Q&A lately, I've heard him say, like, dress or be like the person you want to be. And that's a really good way of modeling and learning to live out step by step the kind of person you want to become and that you will become if you keep playing out this character and be able to represent it faithfully. Because because we're acting all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't feel like we're acting because the role that we have is a role that we're already comfortable in.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we intuitively know, like, when you come home to Mississauga, you know how to play a role pattern of behavior of son.
Right.
And, you know, that relationship of like son between parents is going to change as you're older, but still, you know how to play that role because you've acted it out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess as the roles become more separate from, let's say, venture more into the unknown as to the kind of person you are, I guess there's a kind of thrill to it. There's a kind of excitement of being in strange territory, but still having to act that out.
Mm.
Because it's
So
not
venture.
precisely manner of behavior or a pattern of activity that you're used to, but you can still embody in some way.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a kind of thrill to that when you like act out completely different characters. Maybe it lets you live out some of the parts of you that haven't been getting as much of a spotlight. Let's
Mm.
say like let's say your consciousness is something like a spotlight and you can illuminate the different parts of your psyche that are well being over or underrepresented in your in your persona. So perhaps playing a different role gives a chance for the underrepresented parts of your motivations and your person to come out and play, and literally come out and play.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's why I think acting is so enjoyable.
Interesting. I have no more to add to that. That's actually, I think, a pretty good account. Um, yeah, I never consider it. I think the most fun roles to play are those where you have a bit of knowledge of how to play that character,
Yeah.
but you still have a little to explore.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was in a Cell Block Tango as one of the acts,
Wow.
as the only male, and
Wow.
I played the foreign character
I
and
haven't watched.
delivered my lines in Korean. And I was this confused little Korean boy, and people enjoyed that for sure.
Yeah.
And that was definitely a character that I haven't played in a long time. So
Yeah, there's a degree of like nostalgia about that of playing something you haven't played for a really long time.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, of playing a role that you've forgotten that you were before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or there's lots of times where you play out your, let's say, your child self without recognizing it. I find this a lot, like when I'm with my parents, especially. Maybe that's another reason, like part of the reason why I don't like being home.
Mm.
When I'm outside, I can act like my own independent person, and I'm different. When I'm at home, I feel as though that changes. I'm back into the role of like dependent son,
Mm.
and there's a degree of what do you call it? Like I remember when I was a kid, I would get very like pouty.
Okay.
But my parents didn't buy me ice cream or something, and like there's that like emotional state that I'm like very familiar with, that like
Mm.
whole stubbornness and like even in my head I'm always saying like, oh, I need to stay mad as long as possible so they know exactly how I feel. So um, but that can usually be resolved with ice cream. But there are those like emotional states that I remember that I sometimes find myself playing again just because of like the context of the relationships and the role that I'm used to playing.
Right.
So getting past that is really difficult.
I agree. I take on a son role as well when I'm home in Mississauga, and it's not pouting. That's not what I used to do, but it was just strict obedience. I think is the best way to put it. Like it's just I give up my entire individuality when I'm at home, and I just do whatever is demanded of me, which isn't much, to be honest, but I'm constantly in a state where I'm prepared to provide and to obey to a command. And that's restricting, to say the least. Yeah. So you can see I'm excited to move out next week.
Yeah, me too. Maybe the solution is, giving, for there being some space so that you don't revert back to the exact same pattern of behavior when when you meet your parents again. But that's a difficult dilemma.
It is.
The result, I guess. We're growing up.
Yeah, it's a strange thing, but I'm happy to grow up. I'm happy to grow up.
Yeah.
Let the dead wood burn.
Yeah. There's a lot going for us. There's a lot to be grateful for. Both very relatively healthy, one of the most peaceful and stable nations on earth in one of the most peaceful and stable, arguably, time frames in history, and very materialistically well off in relative terms, also in absolute terms, with my second line of credit coming. We gotta get great education. We're relatively well supported. Could be more. So there's a lot. There's a lot going for us.
Right. Yeah, and that's another can of worms that I don't really want to open up right now. Yeah, in terms of what that means, responsibility or guilt or. Anyway, we have some time. I think if you want to share one more thing, or do you want to close it off? Do you?
I mean, well, what was that? What was it about that can of worms that?
Oh, you're interested in that?
Yeah, that repulsed you.
Well,
why can of worms.
Sorry?
Why is that a can of worms?
Because it's something that I've been grappling with, and that's associated with a lot of emotions. Yeah, that whole topic is laden with emotions for me. I can't assess your visual cues well enough to see whether or not you want me to continue.
Yes.
So essentially, I had a period in my life, and I still sort of carry it now, where I have deep guilt about where I am. And in the media, it's like white privilege or white guilt.
Yeah.
I'm not white, but it's sort of the same idea. I'm born into something that I didn't work for, and my parents work relentlessly every day, every week, and it's been like that for 20 years, 20 or so years. And so it's I feel like it's a lot of credit that's been built, and that's not always the best way to put it, but I feel like I have to pay them back, and there's no doubt that I have to pay them back. And I've talked to a lot of people about this, and they've said, your parents are doing what they want. You should do what you want and what's good for you. But to me, I guess it's one of my values that I'm not going to go back on, is I would never forget to pay back someone who's done so much for me. And so the reason why I get so emotional about this is sometimes I feel like I'm doing things that I don't deserve to do. So, for example, in third year, I remember I think I went out to get sushi or something. It was something small, but it it ended up being like $37 because it's an expensive place. And for the next week, I didn't go out to eat. I didn't buy any food. I went to the store. Yeah, I got some like basic vegetables and meat, but I just didn't want to spend any more money because I felt like that money could have been spent and could have been invested and then, paid back to them because it wasn't something that I needed. It was something that I wanted. Um, so that hit me for a while, for the week. Um, so yeah, that's the main concern for me is guilt and also the conflicting emotion that I shouldn't be feeling guilty. And if I do feel guilty, it's going to slow me down and it's going to make it harder for me to pay them back in the future anyway. So yeah, doing the best for me might be doing the best for them. That sort of idea.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that was like very profound what you said at the end. Like doing the best for you could be what might be doing the best for them too. Mm-hmm. Does that help absolve your sense of guilt at all?
It's doing it more now than before. And right. It might be because I feel like I'm finally in a place where I am going to be able to do good for me and I'm going to be able to pay them back. Because again, like in third year, I wasn't sure about what my future would be like. And so spending $37 at a sushi place meant a lot because I didn't know if I could earn it back in a sense. But now that I'm, going to medical school and I do know that I'm going to get to a place where I can pay them back, I feel more comfortable doing things just for me, and knowing that I'm going to have some margin left to pay back to them. So it's not the idea itself that doing good for me is going to be doing good for them. That is comforting. It's just this newfound rise in status or whatever you might call it.
Yeah. Certainty.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a very relevant issue because I've grappled with the same thing too. Like especially for third year, that's when I had in third year, second semester, I'd taken Aboriginal health. So I become very acutely aware of, let's say, suffering that some marginalized populations had as a direct result of the sins of, the people that came before us, let's say, or the things that I'm enjoying that, that my parents, my grandparents, my great grandparents have like worked very tirelessly for. And and that whole concept of white privilege, that was something that I was like very, let's say, entrenched in or believed in to a degree. So like when I went on vacation with my parents to the Dominican, like there's always this voice in the back of my head, like, oh, or why are we going to like this tourist resort? I'm like, oh, should we go to like a sustainable like tourism? Like, isn't there a way to like do this better? Like, there's this always like nagging sense of guilt and doubt as to whether I am deserving of, this investment, which, to some people might seem trivial, but like you said, that 37 something, whatever, can feel huge when you're cheap and relatively poor undergrad. Right. But like the kind of resolution, there's a couple of things that have helped me to resolve this issue. And I think the first thing that I came across was the idea that yes, you can most certainly make a case that you're not deserving of any of the privileges or wealth that you have come to stumble up into in your life. But the way you can repay that is to aim to be the kind of person that does deserve it.
Right.
So there's, let's say, an ethical I don't want to say imperative, but a drive that can be derived from that. So, okay, I want to become the kind of person that deserves it. But then there's a second problem, which is when you're living your day-to-day life, especially in your still self, you observe so many aspects of yourself that are lazy, that are inadequate, that are falling very short of that ideal.
Right.
And there's this one particular experience I had when, I was like down to the littlest, most particular details, wondering how to act. Because it had occurred to me that every single action I take, if I take the implications of complexity science seriously, the most minute and smallest of my actions may have a catastrophic or the greatest version of eutrophic, let's say, activity in the world. If you take that very seriously, I was thinking can I eat this piece of fruit? What effect is it going to have on my body? What pesticides were sprayed on to to produce this fruit? What labor system of labor am I supporting? Wow. And then I go to the washroom, should I flush? Where is this water going to? What if it's gonna very neurotic and focused, but I noticed the key realization I had there was that I was paralyzed and I couldn't act.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do anything because of that. And the solution I developed there was I developed a kind of a wink. And that wink is I don't know exactly what I'm doing. I sense that there may be consequences that are much beyond my control, but when I'm wiser and when I know a bit more, I'll try to correct for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that wink was coming from, let's say, I developed this persona of a all-knowing future June, that's been through it all, that's that knows better, and is winking to his younger self, permitting him to make mistakes and do stupid things. Because if you aren't permitted to make mistakes and be dumb and stupid, then you can't act in the world.
Right.
If you act with the presumption that you feel guilty and are being criticized about every single action, you can't act.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that spending time with you instead of why shouldn't we be in the hospitals in Haiti working with partners in health to develop our medical skills and provide for the most impoverished populations of the world? There are an infinite amount of possibilities leading to an infinite amount of future outcomes that we aren't able to appraise. Mm-hmm. Because we are so limited and fundamentally flawed. So that wink gesture and the kind of, it's an accepting older brother kind of persona that I've developed. Yeah, that really helped me.
Why a wink?
A wink is it's a cheeky way of acknowledging.
Yeah.
Well, what is it acknowledging? Or imagine that a god figure is doing the winking, but a part of you is that god figure. It's a part of you, and let's say the end of time, will come to know the exact implications of your actions. Imagine that. But right now, when you ask that part of yourself, so what's gonna come out as a part of this? That part of you, winks and says, just wait and see.
Well, it's acceptance.
It's okay. It's a playful gesture of acceptance and forgiveness for the things that you're ignorant of.
Mm-hmm.
And the third is a theological argument. So it's in terms of accepting that, like what's been most helpful, I think, is, I mean, like I do have a Christian upbringing, so in like Christian theology, like there's this idea that we are irredeemably full of like sin and like inadequacies, and yeah, and so much dead wood, that we deserve to die and burn forever. We could burn forever because of our inadequacies. But there's a strange idea in Christianity, and I'm sure in other religions as well, that we have been redeemed in some sense. And now, like the details of how that, what that means and like what consequences that has is like, a theological debate, that has been happening for, for thousands of years. But like in some sense, like I do believe in that, and like Jordan Peterson's like 12 Rules for Life, I think it was the second chapter, about the rule of the second chapter is take care of yourself as if you're someone you were responsible for taking care of, or treat yourself, in that way. And in that he outlines that, like, yeah, we are irredeemably flawed and we have those errors, but if we don't, but at the same time, we are worthy and deserving of that treatment. And we are, and when we act in a way that, let's say, when we act in concordance with that theory, that although we are irredeemably flawed, we are deserving of love and our own trust, then things turn out better. That motive being is like the best possible outcome. And like that's what he would conceptualize as love, right? Like love for yourself, or for others, or for humanity. And I believe that to be the case. Like I don't know what the like theological implications of that are, but I think if we act in a way such that we act as though the most heinous of crimes that were committed by, people like us, and I'm just going to say us. Let's imagine that, we had in our previous lives collectively lived the lives of all of humanity. If we treat each other and other people, in that fashion, what we bring about is the best that can possibly come about. And I think, like, I think that's true. Like, I don't know. I think it'd be very difficult to make a like counter argument towards that. But so that has been my 3-step, well, my 3 key main events that have helped me absolve a sense of guilt, and to try to invest in myself and to do what's good for me and for others, like simultaneously, a little bit more generously.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. The thing that's most compelling to me is I think the idea that eventually you'll be able to pay back, or if you feel guilty, you'll be able to go back and atone for your sins or whatever. But in order to do that, you have to keep going. Like you can't do so by staying where you are and committing yourself to this self prison of guilt and of anxiety and fear. It really is a sort of fear, I think. It's rooted in fear. It's the fear that you're not worthy of what you're receiving. So maybe it does sort of come from a sense of lack of self-worth, that you've done things in your life that make you not worthy of what you're getting, and there was definitely some of that during that time. So again, I think it is most compelling for me to think, okay, I should take courage. I should take the path that will actually enable me to do something about that guilt instead of letting the guilt consume me or letting it get in the way of my potential and my potential to atone for that guilt. Yeah, it's fascinating because that is a theme that's been discussed in the Bible and in religion. This sort of theme is thousands and thousands of years old.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that people have been grappling with this for that long is is amazing to me. I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Actually, is
yeah. Like it might be one of the most like fundamental problems you could have, like as a person.
Mm-hmm.
There are there are gifts that we're not worthy of, and there are actions that we can feel guilty about. So there's, but we're very limited in terms of being able to understand or predict what the consequences of our actions are,
Mm-hmm.
or anything like that. So the best way forward is to treat yourself as though you are that you are deserving of, and you have been redeemed in some way.
And act that out.
And act that out.
I think it's important. Yeah, it's two things.
Act it out and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to wrap this up then? It's a good time. It's a good way to end.
I think so. You have
All right.
anything you want to share?
No, I'm good. Next week.
I'm good too.
All right, sweet.
That was fun.
Thank you for listening.
See you next week.
Bye.